Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, I'm doing it. Where's Jeff? What? Okay. I just want to, first of all, thank all of you for coming. Will you please be quiet in the back? I thank all of you for coming to this party in honor of Jeff Hamlin. I had prepared a speech here, but I think just fuck it. What do we have to say and what do we have to celebrate about Jeff Hamlin? I've said this before, certainly to the day when we talked about Jeff's retirement to the crew of the Beaumont. Most of you don't remember the history of Lincoln Center Theater. And most of you, I dare say, don't realize when Gregory and Bernie and Jeff Hamlin came here 30 years ago, this place was not, dare I say, the Eden that it is today. It was unproved. Cynics, of which there were many then and even more now, felt it was doomed. Most people felt that thrust stages were impossible to work on, impossible to design shows on. And that was the atmosphere in which Bernie and Gregory and Jeff came. And here we are 30 years later. And they set out to do something amazing, because what was really true in those days was that Lincoln Center was not particularly supportive of a theater here. And their mission was to either make it work in a couple of years, or this was it for theater at Lincoln Center. There was going to be either a triplex cinema, or they would fill the bottom floors with sand and make the Beaumont into an indoor ice skating rink. That was what was going on then. And Bernie and Gregory started modestly with Jeff Hamlin. Jeff's contribution to the beginning of this theater and I don't mean to be bragging, but the flourishing of this theater, these three theaters that we have here, is incalculable. And when someone on a staff of a theater who was there at the very beginning and contributed so much to the growth of this theater leaves, it's a sad day. Jeff's understanding of the theater, his many years as a stage manager before he came here, his love of designers and the designs that they make, his belief in the plays that we did over all these years, some of them wonderful, some of them insane, most of them at least interesting. But Jeff was a true believer. And what is Jeff like as a person? Most of you know him as well as I do. Thoughtful, classy, intelligent, educated, old-fashioned, a gentleman, and someone who truly loves the theater. I have no idea why he's decided to retire from the theater. I can't imagine anyone giving up a life in the theater, but I have never been a production manager. Those of you who know, and there are many designers, beloved designers of ours here, it is the hardest job, because you want to honor what the design is, you want to fulfill what the director wants, you have to deal with management and the budget, and you have to sit there night after night after night and watch a show evolve. Jeff's contribution to Lincoln Center Theater is incalculable. And his leaving us is, as I said earlier, sad. But he's left this incredible legacy. Here we are 30 years later, and we have 3 shows in 3 theaters. And Jeff has been enormously responsible for all of that. And the only good thing about his leaving is that we have a wunderkind, his darling associate, who has been here almost as long as he has, who is taking his place. So without further ado, I want to, on behalf, Jeff, of all of us here, the staff, the crew of the Beaumont, friends, designers, thank you for all you have done for us. We wouldn't be here without you. And now, Paul Smithyman.
What he said. I did write it down, and it's a little emotional, so I will have to read it. I've been given the splendid honor to introduce one of the original architects of this fine, fair establishment, and a man who I now count as a member of my family. Now, you are going to have to forgive me for blobbing, because it's quite likely to happen, but I'll reach down and get my English reserve in my fancy trousers. I consider myself very fortunate to have spent my adult life making my way in the theatre. 20 years walking around on stages in dark rooms with people emoting all over the place. Sounds a bit messy, I suppose. But lucky me, lucky boy. Not only do I work in the theatre, but I've worked for 20 years with a most happy fella. Now, it's one of his favourite ones. That's why I wanted to get, just so you all know. I don't want to upset anyone, but it really was one of his favourites. I did a little research yesterday, and I found out that Jeff and I have played our part as a team in the creation of 97 shows here. So that means 97 directors. Hundreds of stagehands. Probably 200-300 stage managers. Oh my Lord. Designers up the wazoo. Probably 1,000 actors. But most importantly, 9,700 hours of tech. I would say that, but from Hat Good to the Who and the What, Jeff Hamlin has helped me on my way to being a theatre man. Like Jeff, I'm at heart part of a beautiful group driven to tell stories and make the world a wiser, brighter, happier place. Now, that's Mr. Jeffrey Hamlin, a wise, bright, happy man, a New England gentleman, born and raised backstage, who, with passion and poise, has played a great part in ensuring our tradition goes on. Mr. Jeffrey Hamlin.
I wanted desperately to keep everything together until I could get through this moment, but I have failed. Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, my colleagues. Thank you, my friends, for coming tonight to celebrate this retirement. My journey here began in 1985, when Bernard Gersten, who had at one time been my teacher, was my mentor, and had opened the door for me to have a real career in the theater here in New York, suggested that I get in touch with Gregory Mosher, his new partner, with an idea that perhaps I would like to come up to Lincoln Center Theater and become a production manager. I thought that took a lot of confidence to think that a production stage manager could be a production manager. But anyway, I did have that chat with Gregory Mosher, and I did get hired to be our production manager here. And 29 years later, I get to say to Bernard Gersten, in person, in front of all of you, thank you, thank you, thank you. But how do I describe how I'm feeling about the experience that I've had here at Lincoln Center Theater, being your production manager? How do I describe to you the extraordinary connection I feel with all of you here today, with whom I have shared in some fashion part of that journey? And I've decided that the only way to answer that question really is to tell you a Lincoln Center Theater story. Albeit a story told from the point of view of a production manager. Most of you know that I'm a sailor, and that I can think of nothing more exhilarating in all the world than to be on a sailboat out of sight of land with nothing but an endless horizon in front of me. And I've been very fortunate over the years because I've actually had an opportunity more than a few times to go on voyages like that. And when I'm out there, I discovered that the experience has a lot of similarities with my experience as a production manager, because whether I'm out sailing over an expanse of the Atlantic Ocean or if I'm in the uncharted waters of a new production in one of our theaters, I found some things to be very true. I found that despite one's diligence in preparing and planning a voyage, and despite one's skill at being a navigator and charting a course, and despite one's vigilance in standing watch and trying to anticipate the obstacles or hazards that might lay in your path, one thing is absolutely sure: it's inevitable. At one point, you're going to get slammed by the unexpected, and it would seem that all is lost. And that certainly was the case here at Lincoln Center when we did The Coast of Utopia. That trilogy of plays by Tom Stoppard: Voyage, Shipwreck, Salvage, that we produced in 2006. Do you guys remember the coup de théâtre that began each one of those plays that our brilliant director, Jack O'Brien, and his gifted scenic designer, Bob Crowley, had dreamt up? Lights up. Floating above the roiling waves of storm-tossed sea, our protagonist, Alexander Herzen, sits in a chair that is slowly revolving. He is lost in thought. And then, at the crescendo of the storm, Herzen begins to sink. And then he is engulfed by the billowing waves of gray China silk. And then, in a thrice, the silken waves disappear into the deck. Herzen and the chair are no longer visible, and we're left looking at the vast, empty Beaumont stage. But it's no longer the tempestuous seascape that it once was. It's now the tranquil summer garden of a 19th century Russian country estate. I mean, wow! As Jack would say, wow! I mean, had we ever seen anything like that in our lives? And I ask you, how did they do that? But, you know, we had problems. We had big problems. And you see that the ribbon lift, so named because in steel it emulates a ribbon coming off a spool, which we thought would be the perfect solution because of our limited height in the trap room below the stage and our need to get the actor in the chair to a height of 10 feet above the stage. well, you know, it was temperamental, it was finicky, it didn't really work well with the turning mechanism that we have. Remember, Walter? And, you know, more often than not, it would left our lead actor, Brian O'Beirne, marooned above the stage. I mean, it was a showstopper of the worst kind, right? And not only that, but, you know, sometimes when it did go down, it wobbled and it jerked, and it totally destroyed the illusion that our director and designer were looking for. And, you know, frankly, one look at the face of Jack O'Brien, and I knew that, you know, my sailboat had broached. I was hanging onto the gunnels with my fingernails, and the cockpit was awash. But here's the thing. I had trusted shipmates. I had people that were working with me, tried and tested. We had logged many, many hours together. And so, in extremis, we were able to fall into that familiar collective routine, and we were able to work the problem, come up with a solution with our partners up at the shop, our engineers, and in a relatively short time, but under extreme pressure, we came up with another idea. However, there was one more hitch, and that was that I still needed another 10 feet below the stage. And so I called my friend Bob Goldberg over at Your Construction, and he sent over some men one night, and they literally began to saw through the 8-inch trap room concrete floor. And by first light the next morning, we had gained access to the shop floor in the basement, some 20 feet below our stage. And from there, we were able to stage our new lifting device, which when fully extended reached 30 feet and ended up working flawlessly for the rest of the run. I had never been more proud of my team. You know, when faced with that kind of crisis, I sometimes think about a scene from an absolutely wonderful film about the theater, coincidentally with a screenplay by Tom Stoppard, Shakespeare in Love. And in that scene, an Elizabethan theater producer, played by Geoffrey Rush, tries to calm down a nervous and panicked investor, one Mr. Smithyman, played by Tom Wilkinson. And the producer says, "Mr. Smithyman, allow me to explain the theater business. The natural condition is one of insurmountable obstacles on the road to imminent disaster." And Mr. Smithyman says, "What are we to do?" And the producer answers rather blithely, "Well, nothing really. I mean, somehow it all turns out well." And Mr. Smithyman says, "But how?" And the producer says, "I don't know. It's a mystery." And you know, that mystery is sometimes very much in evidence during that frequently fraught and tense period of any production, theater production, which are technical rehearsals. And during technical rehearsals, well, as I like to think of it, technical rehearsals are when our two casts actually come together and start working in the same space at the same time together. And by that I mean our cast that has been in the rehearsal studio, our director and assistants, and our actors, and our stage managers, and our production assistants, and our other cast, which has been up in the stage and in the auditorium, our designers and their associates, and our production team, and of course, foremost of all, our heads of department in the carpentry, electrics, properties, wardrobe, and hair departments. And in that crucible of time and space before we go in front of an audience for the first time, through a mysterious alchemy, those two casts meld and they become one company of players. Some are performing in the brightness of the stage lights, others are performing in the dim blue glow of the running lights backstage, others are performing in the glare of computer terminals and sound and lighting consoles out at the production tables in the house. And I have to tell you that, especially over the last 6 months, I sit in the darkened theater and I look out over all of that, and I am simply overwhelmed by what I see. And what I see is this just amazing concentration of collaborative human endeavor, all working their individual role, all focused on one common goal, all working with such skill, such talent, and such artistry. And I'd be a fool to think that I'm not going to miss being part of that. I certainly will. But in closing, I'd like to say this to you. I'm certainly going to be at all of your opening nights. And during the curtain call, I want you to know that I'm not only going to be applauding for that performance, I am going to be cheering you with all of my heart, the journey taken that got you there. So once again, I would just want to thank you very much for being part of my journey here at Lincoln Center Theater. And, as a sailor would say, until we cross tacks again, I wish you fair winds and following seas. Thank you.